Day 613 of the Trump administration, and all eyes are on Thursday's planned meeting between President Trump and Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein as he deals with the fallout from the explosive article late last week in the New York Times. Rosenstein's job seems safe for now after an important meeting at the White House today with Chief of Staff John Kelly. We'll have much more on all of that in just a moment. However, Thursday is also when we are set to hear from Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and his accuser, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, when she testifies before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And earlier tonight, Michael Avenatti told Rachel Maddow on this very network that he's representing a client, someone new to this story and unknown to all of us as of yet, a woman prepared to make credible allegations against Judge Kavanaugh.
I'm representing one client who I can describe as a witness and victim, as well as additional corroborating witnesses to what she is going to allege publicly within the next 48 hours. As it relates to her particular allegations, we're not going to provide additional information beyond that which is contained within the emails that I exchanged with the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Earlier today, Kavanaugh called advanced claims from Avenatti false and outrageous and said he's not going anywhere after another accusation of sexual misconduct surfaced, which brings us to last night's story, the alleged incident that took place while Kavanaugh was in college at Yale. The New Yorker magazine details an accusation from a Connecticut native named Deborah Ramirez, who says she remembers Kavanaugh exposing himself at a drunken party roughly 35 years ago. Ramirez says she was drinking that night and acknowledged that there are significant gaps in her memory of that evening as a result. But she said after 6 days of carefully assessing her memory, she's confident it was Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh denied the allegation in a letter to the leaders of the Senate Judiciary Committee today. He wrote in part, quote, another false and uncorroborated accusation from 35 years ago was published. Once again, those alleged to have been witnesses to the event deny it ever happened. There is now a frenzy to come up with something, anything that will block this process and a vote on my confirmation from occurring. These are smears, pure and simple. Earlier this evening, in light of his nomination in peril and the weight of these new allegations, Kavanaugh and his wife Ashley took the rare step of a joint television appearance with Martha MacCallum of Fox News.
I never did any such thing. Never did any such thing. The other people alleged to be there don't recall any such thing. If such a thing had happened, it would have been the talk of campus. The women I knew in college and the men I knew in college says it's inconceivable that I could have done such a thing. And the New York Times has reported that just last week, the person making the accusation was calling other classmates saying she was not sure that I had done this.
Meanwhile, as we mentioned on Thursday, we expect to hear from Brett Kavanaugh's first accuser, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, a California college professor. She is set to testify against Kavanaugh before the Committee on the Judiciary at 10 a.m. Although we know the hearing will be open to the public and that Dr. Ford will testify first, other details are still being worked out. As we've reported, Dr. Ford has accused Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her at a high school party back in the 80s. Kavanaugh again denied the allegation in tonight's interview on Fox News.
I was never at any such party. The other people who are alleged to be present have said they do not remember any such party. A woman who was present, another woman who was present, who is Dr. Ford's lifelong friend, has said she doesn't know me and never remembers being at a party with me at any time in her life. I am not questioning and have not questioned that perhaps Dr. Ford at some point in her life was sexually assaulted by someone in some place. But what I know is I've never sexually assaulted anyone.
Kavanaugh also told Fox News he will not withdraw his nomination to the Supreme Court and that he still has the support of the president.
We're looking for a fair process where I can be heard and defend the my integrity, my lifelong record of promoting dignity and equality for women, starting with the women who knew me when I was 14 years old. I'm not going anywhere.
Do you believe that President Trump is going to stand by you throughout?
I know he's going to stand by me. He called me this afternoon and said he's standing by me.
Senate Republicans are coming out with a more forceful defense of Judge Kavanaugh of late. Earlier today, in a speech on the Senate floor, Senator Mitch McConnell blasted something he named 6 or 7 times, the smear campaign by the other side against Kavanaugh.
Delay things even further. Even by the far left's standards, this shameful smear campaign has hit a new low. And I want to make it perfectly clear, Mr. President, Judge Kavanaugh will be voted on here on the Senate floor. Up or down, on the Senate floor, this fine nominee to the Supreme Court will receive a vote in this Senate in the near future.
President Trump here in New York is also standing by his Supreme Court nominee. Here is his response after being asked if he's confident that Kavanaugh would be confirmed.
This is a fine man, and we certainly hope he's going to be confirmed, and quickly. His family has suffered. His family has suffered. What's going on is not something that should happen.
On that, let's bring in our leadoff panel on a Monday night. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Cynthia Oxney, a former federal prosecutor and a veteran of the Civil Rights Division at Justice. And Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI assistant director for counterintelligence, who in the past has worked for, among others, one Robert Mueller. Good evening and welcome to you all. Cynthia, as it often does, Counselor, it falls on you to sum it all up. Where are we tonight? Where are we in light of the new Avenatti client? Where are we in light of the Fox News television interview? Where are we in light of an approaching hearing on Thursday?
Well, and you have to add to that, where are we with this new yearbook post?
Yeah, I left a couple things out.
Yeah. So let's look at the yearbook post for a second, because small facts reveal big truths.
Share with our audience what we're discussing here.
So what we know is from the New York Times and from his yearbook, he had a yearbook page which included a comment, and he had a girl's name that I'm not going to repeat because she's been through enough, alumnus. And 14 other boys had the same thing. And it was essentially a running joke that these boys had, and in essence, they're calling her a slut. That's what's going on. And they thought that was funny, and they thought that was acceptable. And when asked about it, of course, he denies and has some excuse. And what we know is from that small fact is he's the type of person who could be so vile and so disrespectful to the women he's around, and that he continues to lie about it. And he lies about that, and he lies about whether or not he got the documents from Senator Leahy and Senator Kennedy and Lisa Graves, and he lies about whether or not he knew that Judge Kaczynski was sexually harassing people, and he's lied about what he's done to these other women. So what we have is a candidate for the United States Supreme Court who wants to be confirmed for the most important lifetime appointment we have in this, the greatest country of the world, and he's a liar. That's what we have.
If you're right and he's lying, how do you square that other Brett Kavanaugh with the person we saw on that Fox News interview sitting next to his wife tonight?
That person was coached, and when he got verklempt over some question, it is just... It's coaching, and it'd be one thing if he said, you know what, when I was young and stupid, I was young and stupid, and I apologize, and I had hurt people's feelings. But that's not it. He says, I was always a Boy Scout. I was always a champion of women. That's not true. And maybe he has grown up in the manner in which he treats women. There's nothing like children and girls to teach you that, right? We have kids. But the other things, in his ambition, this lying about Kaczynski, and the lying about the documents that he did receive as a political operative from Leahy and Kennedy and Lisa Graves, that's a character trait. And he's got it. He's got it in spades.
Frank, your former organization, the FBI, sure has been part of the conversation of late. And I'm curious, with an FBI veteran like yourself, to hear all of us lay people talking about how an investigation could be done. It would be normal to bring in the FBI. It could be done in 3 days. What kinds of things could a professional, if I dump the shoebox of this case in front of you, what kinds of things could you bring back to help this hearing to better fill in the blanks as to who Brett Kavanaugh is?
So, Brian, there's not only tangible investigative benefits to bringing in an independent fact finder, but it also would serve the Senate so much better to be able to say, we know we're not the experts on this. We want to give it to the professional investigator. So here's how the FBI would approach this. And by the way, it's been done many times before with high-level nominees. I personally, in my career, have been involved in briefing the White House on derogatory information on their nominees and have gone so far to get White House concurrence on a polygraph and interrogation of their nominee, which, by the way, cleared that nominee who moved forward. All of this can be done in a matter of days. So you have an expert on sexual assault interviews who could interview the surviving victim, right? You have people who could get brought into an FBI interview who would be told right up front, it's a violation of federal law to lie to us. There's independent corroboration, tracking of time and place that could all be done by an independent fact finder. And the White House is the only body that could call the FBI back in and tell them to reopen the case.
And if you're innocent, the FBI is your friend.
They are finders of fact. We seek the truth and we pass on the product.
Okay, Peter Baker, will you know when there are any signs, if there are ever any signs of wobbly support by the White House?
Well, for the moment, the White House is all in on Judge Kavanaugh, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, of course, is this is a president who himself has been on the receiving end of allegations of sexual misconduct. He has a tendency to, therefore, sympathize with those who also are so accused and gets his back up when these accusations come across. Remember, of course, Roy Moore in Alabama. Secondly, it's just a matter of strategy. There's not enough time between now and the election to put forward another nominee and get that nominee confirmed, most likely. If that's the case, then they're taking their chances on how the election turns out. If Democrats are to win, and remember, it's a 51-49 Senate right now, that's a very different ballgame for this Supreme Court seat. So the best option from a strategic point of view for the White House is to try to get Judge Kavanaugh in there relatively quickly, which is why you saw Senator McConnell get up on the floor today and vow that he will have that vote regardless of what is said at that hearing. But you've got a few Republican senators who are on the fence, and they're going to be paying a lot of attention to what is said on Thursday. And I think, it really depends on the credibility and the presentations of these two witnesses and how they strike these wavering senators who will make the decision.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.